Hi guys, my name is Ronald and I want to say thank you guys very much for joining what we are calling the Permit Lab. All right, the Permit Lab is not a lecture, right? It is not a lecture, it is designed to be an interactive session. So as much as possible, you guys, please feel free to jump in and ask questions. I'm being very deliberate and intentional about that aspect of the whole presentation because I want people to actually have their questions answered. So I'm going to be leaving some time after every segment to basically answer questions. As the questions come, you can write them down, you can put them in the chat, and you can simply ask me. So we're open to take any questions. You guys will receive a copy of the recording following this presentation. So look out for that, as well as it's going to have some supporting notes and so forth with regards to what we're going to talk about, because we will cover a lot of information, a lot of detail here. And please make sure that your audio is muted, right? So mute your side of the audio just in case if it's not. Obviously, when we come to the question session, you could very well unmute and ask your question, and I'll prompt you to do so. And of course, on the screen, I would say if you move over to the ellipsis on your screen and just right click and just pin my video, so that way any other murmuring that happens, it doesn't switch over to any other person. And then of course, we'll definitely try to finish by 1. That's the goal here. So I'll keep that in mind as I answer questions. But following this session, I'm going to just be hanging out to see if anyone else has any questions related to the content that we discuss. And I'll be happy to just answer any questions that relate to the content or any specific questions about a property that you may be looking at. All right, and I will say this is not a pitch, right? This is really a lab, and I am going to be your technician here today. All right. So my name is Ronald, and I am educated as an architectural designer and also construction manager. I come to this day right now with my BCI in design designation as well as a lead AP. So I do have a number of years experience working in the commercial field, working with not only real estate developers, but big contractors doing institutional type developments and so forth. So I'm very comfortable when it comes to actually talking about this topic of design and construction. But in addition to that, I actually started and ran a business I'm now doing this as an entrepreneur for now going on 9 years. The company is called Property Pathways. We actually offer architectural design, building, permitting services. And in addition to that, I also run a podcast called Ontario Sweet Spot, and you guys would have been receiving communication from that. And as part of Ontario Sweet Spot, we're wrapping Ontario, well, I should say Permit Lab. Permit Lab is designed to essentially create tools and training to support missing middle and multiplex developers in their journey, right? So lots of years experience I'm coming with here, so I'm certainly not shy to answer any questions, right? So I'm also going to post any questions in the chat, right? As I said, we will be doing a question session. So as the questions begin to come in, if they don't, I will actually have some questions that I think is necessary to just ask at the end of each session. And that way we can get the most out of some of these topics that we're going to discuss. So today, this presentation is going to be about 3 screens, right? And this is not, we're not messing around with words here and fancy words. It's really, the first screen is as of right audit. The second screen is external agencies, and the third screen is construction stress test. So because what we realize is that the as of right audit has a lot of complexity. It's very complex. Sometimes it can be more complex than going to the committee of adjustment, if you know what that is. And then of course the external agencies, they carry a lot of power and a lot of authority to basically stall your project for a long time. And construction stress testing your project, and you guys will know what I'm talking about when we get there, is really to make sure that it's a necessity. You want to make sure you're stress testing your project against some construction items as well as some code related items, and we'll talk more about that as well. So does anyone have any questions at this point? Maybe just going into it, like as we're about to jump into some of the content here, does anyone have any kind of, because I will highlight that, underscore that, and even put some more weight to that response. If you do, please drop it in the chat. Okay, so screen one, as of right audit. So we're going to take a look at a specific tool. So here at Property Pathways, we actually develop some tools. The tools that we develop is actually to solve our own internal problems, but it solves our problems so well, we decide to actually launch it out. And that's the whole part of Permit Lab, is to develop tools, techniques, and training that can support developers. And this is one of the tools that we develop, and I'll get into it because, you know, I have come to the conclusion that it makes no sense trying to compete with artificial intelligence. It's here to stay, and it's time that we just embrace it. So rather than compete, I've started to command to produce better results. And I'm going to show you guys what it is I mean when I say that. So I'll actually, if you give me a quick second here, I'll swap on over to Okay, so I wanted to pull this up here because this is going to be extremely important based on what we're going to do here. So let me pull this up. So this right here, could you guys see my screen clearly? Just give me a thumbs up if anybody can see my screen clearly. Is there anyone hearing me?
Yes, I can see you.
Okay, wonderful. All right, good. So you guys may know that when you're looking at a property, you need to simply like do a lot of searching. So I've done hundreds of these type of searches before, and I have basically like within 2 minutes, 2 to 5 minutes, I will know the best use of a property. Now I've worked with people send me addresses all the time, and they're like, hey Ron, is this an as of right use? Could you tell me what's necessary? So right here, I'm going to choose an address. Let's say, for example, I'll say, okay, here is I'm going to type in an address. Right, you guys may know this Toronto map. It's a free map, a free resource online. I'll just type in an address, and if you guys want, you can give me an address just to know like I'm not rigging this. Just putting in an address.
Can I give you an address?
Yeah, sure, why not?
41 Hurricane Avenue in Vaughan.
And Vaughan, yeah. So this is actually a Toronto auditor, but sure, I'm in Toronto map right now.
Okay.
I would need a Toronto address. Vaughan is outside of Toronto. So, okay, sure. I'm gonna, let's see, I'm gonna put in an address here, maybe 114 Wilson Avenue. Sorry about that there, Gino, but we can certainly talk about that address for sure. That's not a problem.
Right.
Okay, so here I'm looking at a site. This site here, it's located, well, we don't know where it's located, right? So we'll have to figure that out. And this is the problem with kind of looking at some of these maps. I'm looking at one map in Toronto, and I'm going to pull up another map in Toronto as well. So I'll pull up Toronto actual map. So Toronto zoning, interactive zoning map. So I'll pull that up too. So Toronto interactive zoning map. It has everything you need in here. I'll put in the same address as well. This is just the search that you would have to do in order to figure out whether your property. And I'm going somewhere with this. Say Wilson, Shaw Wilson. I want to know what's the as of right. I want to know what's the zoning label. I want to know a few things about this property. So, you know, I'll come here quickly. I'll click on, let's turn off this. I'll say, okay, I can see what the height is. I can see whether lot coverage applies, 35. I can see whether it's on a major street. And there's a few different things I can do here, right? And obviously I can come back and see the RD with a frontage of 12, and it has an area of 370. You know, I'll come here. I'll also do some verification because I want to actually check the lot size. And this is what it is I'm doing on a daily basis, by the way, in many cities across Ontario for various investors. So, you know, I can see here it's a 400 square foot site and so forth. Okay, so this site looks good. It's on a major street, so we could do 10. Now, that took me about 3 to 5 minutes. I can do this live on a call for the most part in Toronto and in a lot of cities, secondary markets and so forth, unless we start getting out really far where sites, there's not enough information. And I will say some of those sites have really good. Let me put the same address in this software that and this is artificial intelligence. We're just running a lot of the city information. You can see a source open source data from the city. I'm actually going to put that same address in. Toronto, North York. So this is the type of information that this produces within milliseconds. And this is the tool that we are using in our backend. And I'm going to be releasing this, of course, to the guests on this call to try and test this out as well, because we are testing this in our backend, but we now want to release it to get a little broader testing to see how it works in the city of Toronto particularly. Right now, with that said, you can see here, it's telling you the ward, it's telling you the amount of units you can do as a multiplex. Is it on a major street? Yes, it's very important to know if it's on a major street. It gives you some the estimated parcel width and length and so forth, and we can verify that. So you can see we said it was 400 square meter lot and so forth. So it does give a lot of data that can be quickly retrieved. We talked about the 35% coverage as well. It's in an RD zone. It pulls all the information as well. It talks about the height as well. So it pulls all this information all in one spot. Now, this is a first pass, meaning you drive by a property, you see an address, you put the address in, you find out what could be done, and then you call your designer or planner to then to say like, okay, I need to dig deeper into this because I want to probably put an offer on this or go talk to the owner. Okay, so I thought I should show you guys what that looks like. Does that seem like a tool that you guys could utilize?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. That wasn't a trick question, guys. Yeah, absolutely. It's a tool that I utilize, in spite of the fact that I'm also pretty good with doing this specific type of searches and so forth. All right. So let's go back to the actual presentation there. Okay, so that's a real quick snapshot of what it is we actually do for clients throughout Ontario, and that's one of the things that is absolutely necessary. So when we talk about as of right being an extremely important aspect of looking for properties and whether they can actually deliver on what it is we think it could. All right. So these zoning controls. So each property, zoning is boring. No one likes to talk about zoning because they're very boring, right? And one of the things that I personally know is that while it's boring, just like investments, you want the investment to be boring. Zoning is very boring. Is one of those things that you just simply don't want to do, but it really controls the outcome. And it really determines the success on an actual project. So as you can see here, these are some of the things. If you're a developer, you're working in this space, you would know a lot of these things: site coverage, GFA, FSI, frontage, setbacks, and so forth. All these things control the way that an actual project is, the actual viability of a project, because that's the same language that the city is communicating. So this is just a tool though. It's just simply a tool. And how do you actually use that is basically by using the zoning certificate. So most cities have a zoning certificate program, and I do want to really stress this. You can see here that it says early. It basically establishes early interpretation lock. As a developer, you want to make sure you understand what zoning is before you even start running numbers. And I have this conversation a lot with brokers that obviously are dealing with all of the financial aspect of the project. But you need to get certainty early in the process in order to determine, well, is this something that's going to work? Now, there's two different types of zoning documentation. One is actually called zoning verification. Most cities will offer this through either a phone call, or you can actually order it. You can pay and order it. What you actually get from that is essentially what is the use of the property. And you might say, well, is that necessary? Well, in some cases, we have worked with clients that actually purchased properties, right? They purchased properties that actually operated in a certain way, but the city doesn't recognize it to be that. That's where zoning verification comes in very handy. All cities have that, and in some cases you have to pay for it. In other cases, you can call and they would offer you some information related to the sort of conforming use, the legal use of the property. Now, other cities, there's also the certification. Certification is mandatory in some cities. For example, Burlington is mandatory that you do a pre-application submission before you even apply for a building permit application. In Toronto, it's optional. And if you decide not to do it, then your designer or yourself would have to actually take responsibility for it. And this is something that we certainly do depending on the scale of the project and how quickly you would like it to move. But I always recommend, depending on the scale, that you always do a zoning certification. And that process involves, of course, laying out all of the zoning parameters and making sure that you communicate that well so that the city can then review it and then offer substantial feedback, because they circulate that internally. In Toronto, that is actually that fee that you pay towards the zoning certificate, which can be around $1,200, I believe, or so, that actually is then reimbursed or credited back to the building permit. So it's not money wasted or lost. Whereas in some other cities, for example, Burlington, which I mentioned, you will note that you don't get that credited back. That's actually a non-refundable fee. So very important to note there. Then this is a quite important piece that I'd like to mention, is that your zoning envelope is your first performer. And most people struggle with that, but the reality is, this is what it is. If you don't actually lock your zoning information, you don't even know what you're running as your performer numbers. And we'll talk more about that specifically, how I find that to impact the entire process. Because the spreadsheet only calculates what the bylaw is already allowing. You know, you're not going to purchase a piece of land that would, let's say, for example, could be severed into 2 parcels, but run numbers for 3 parcels. It doesn't make sense, and that risk obviously has to be factored in. Okay, so what am I talking about? Why is zoning important? This is a really good example, and the truth about value creation. So this here is an example that I have seen, and I think it works really well. So zoning feeds into rentable area, which feeds into the actual value creation. So when you look at your zoning, you may see, okay, you purchase an existing building. I'm just going to say hypothetically, you purchase an existing building. The building has an ability to actually put additional like square foot or coverage on that site. Well, the zoning is going to determine that, and the zoning is going to tell you how much of a massing or building you can actually add on to the existing building. So let's just use some hypothetical numbers here. So you can see on the screen now $4 per square foot rent, right? So you guys can whip out your calculator here. How this is actually done is where we're talking about how to create value, because this is real tangible value that ultimately is valuable to you first, but it's also, the lenders will also run these type of calculations, as well as your other investors that you might be pitching your deal to, right? So let's say you develop a property that, let's just say 1,000 square foot, additional square foot you can actually add to the property. Where's my phone? I should pull my phone out and run these numbers. So 1,000 square foot. So if you have 1,000 square foot addition that you can place on a property, then 1,000 square foot of area times $4 per square foot, right? That's how much rent it can generate. Then times that by 12, right? So of course that's $4,000 of rent, right? That space would generate, and then you annualize that by 12, right? So 12 fours, that's $48,000 a year. 70% of that. What is 70% of that? Oh, sorry, here. $48,000 times 70%. So that's actually 30. So that's actually 30. So your net operating income is 70%. That equals to $33,600, right? And then you divide that by your cap rate of 4%. $840,000 of value that is being created. So that's why zoning becomes so critical. And when you're looking at a property, the first thing you want to look at is obviously whether the zoning is going to allow you to create this type of value. Can I take a property, put an addition on, and create more value? Right? Well, sometimes in creating that value, you actually need to go through the process of doing a variance. So there's AOR, which is as of right, and there's C of A, which is Committee of Adjustment. You want to make sure which part is going to actually produce the best results for you. And I do have some scenarios that I actually have encountered while working with clients. Again, I am a designer, just so everyone knows, I am a designer, so I'm talking from experience working with actual clients. And I had a situation where it was an existing building with the potential to increase the footprint. So we had an existing building. We didn't have to demolish the whole thing. We could have increased the building by increasing the actual footprint by demolishing the wall that was not so close to the setback, and then actually moving that wall closer to the sideline. Now, what actually happened is that was a variance. It was a simple variance, was just to demolish that wall and move the wall over about 2 feet to create extra living space so that we can create that value that I just explained to you guys earlier on. What was the challenge that actually occurred? Is that one move triggered multiple different variances or sort of deviation from the provisions of the zoning bylaw. And that's where the problem occurred. So now, because we moved that wall, or we were planning to move that wall, we demolished more than 50% of the what is called main walls of the building, the supporting walls. And those walls now triggered or removed the building from the status of being a legal building or a lawful building. Now it's called new construction. So we now had to figure out side yard setbacks, new provisions, and a slew of them. So very, very keep in mind that a variance, you need to make sure you're really understanding the severity of it and the impact it have. As you can see just right below here, it can have parking impact, stairs impact, cost impact, schedule impact. This is so much different type of risk that can come from actually doing this type of variances. So keep that in mind as you actually progress through assessing your property. All right, so we're going to look at some scenarios here. All right, so we'll look at some scenarios, and I have some of my team members here with me. So I'll have Mustafa pull that up. Okay, here it is. Okay, great. So I wanted to point this out. I think this is actually a really good example. So of course I handpicked this particular property for 2 reasons. One is that it was done in Toronto, but also 2, it was a project that actually had a very unique situation. So you can see on this here, this has a flat roof, kind of a flat slope roof. Mustafa also asked you if you can pull up the other one as well. So I'll talk a little bit about this flat roof scenario here, because this actually was the most cost-effective or budget solution. Could you pull up the second one? There's a laneway at the back, and then there is also a there's also a main building. So you can see the slope roof. This is the most cost-effective roof from a construction standpoint. The client wanted to do this because it just simply costs less, right? You can understand a flat roof, it takes a little more, it's a little more maintenance and so forth. Could you now switch to the flat roof? This actually was not allowed. So it just wasn't possible for us to actually do that. And you may say, well, why not? Well, there's a lot of requirements with regards to building height, with regards to main wall requirements, with regards to where you can put windows and main walls, which rooms, and there's just a whole bunch of different things that we couldn't do. So we had to pivot to actually doing what you're seeing here now, which is a sort of a flat roof that has repositioned the structure. Now this required, while we try to remove ourselves from triggering a variance, we actually ultimately had to restructure the entire building to make it work. So you can see here, this roof here is flat. It's flat now, and the windows in the front of the building, we had to reduce the windows because we have to add this dormer style roof, mansard roof. There's just a bunch of things here that I'm not going to get into the details of because it would just take it would take a lot of specificity here. But just know, as you make changes to a property, it always leads to unintended changes as far as zoning goes, right? And if you want to switch back just one more time to the sloped roof, just so you can see how the window sizes were. It was very different. It was just going to be significantly larger. This would have worked. It just would have required 3 variances, whereas the next one required no variances. We did go to get a zoning certificate, and it was successful. All right, amazing. So let's actually move on here to the next. How am I doing for time here? Nice. Okay, so let's move on here to scene 2. But before I move on to scene 2, I know we just discussed a few different things here. I wanted to know if anybody had any questions with regards to the content that we just discussed here. Because I can ask a question, you know, and you know, I kind of put together some questions here because there's a lot to be considered as far as what are what are some bylaws, sort of tripwires essentially, that you can get into when you're looking at properties. I mean, there's a lot of them, but one of them is parking. And I know there's a lot of talk about parking is not required and stuff. Well, that's literally the truth inside Toronto. Outside Toronto, that's not the truth. So if you're working on a property outside Toronto, make sure you're taking parking into account because it can really mess your project up. Even in Toronto, the flip side of this is that in Toronto, if you remove parking, like in the case you took an attached garage and you actually converted it into a living space or converted it into part of the living space, you actually have to remove your driveway entirely. That is the bylaw. And that can be quite expensive. The landscape area becomes very tricky, and there's a lot of things that need to be accounted for. So that's kind of one of the tripwires that I have observed. And again, you have to work with someone that understands this, or you yourself need to have a basic understanding of what are some of those things that can trip your project up and send it into essentially turmoil. All right, so do not count approvals. Weigh them. Weigh their risk. Weigh their cost on your project. Weigh how much time it takes for them to actually get done. Because not all approvals are actually made equal. That's how I like to put it, because some approvals actually will take a lot of time out of your timeline. And time is very important on real estate when you're investing in real estate, or you're even just doing a renovation to your existing home for multi-generational purposes. And we have done a few of those. But with that said, carrying costs adds up every time, every month passes. There's utility bills, there's insurances, there's property taxes. All these things are adding up, right? And not to mention the mortgage that you're carrying. So we try our best to assess all of this in advance. And why we are doing that? Because there's just so many different type of approval processes. We try to lean more towards what you're seeing up here, right? So you can see up top we have the soft approval, and then we have the robust approval. We try to make sure that we always lean more into the soft approval. And if you're asking what is the soft approval, really and truly, that is when you work with an agency that has jurisdiction over your project, and because your project is not maybe an extensive build or development, they would reduce the amount of things that would be needed. For example, additional studies and so forth, right? As you can imagine. So, but with that said, when you go through a robust approval or your project has multiple different things that need to be addressed, you can see how it is. That starts to take a lot of time every time you have to do this. And one of the main points I want to point to here is that this happens it doesn't happen all at once, right? This happens in a very sort of sequential manner. So nothing happens concurrently here. You have to wait until this department reviews it or this agency before it moves on to the next one and so forth. So it's very important that you understand this, you weigh this and make sure that you're not getting yourself trapped within any lock. And I say lock, I'm talking about the Panama locks. That image was pretty good. Here is the actual truth here. We actually worked on a property where we actually had three agencies look at the exact same site, which seemed to me to be the exact same reason. So they were looking at the trees, the slopes, and natural feature, but they were all looking at it for different reasons. And why are all these divisions doing the same thing? Maybe this is all taxpayer grab. I don't know. It's tax money. This is tax money that's paying for these agencies to do their jobs. But there's overlapping. It seems like it's overlapping, but it's really making sure that they apply different type of like test to what it is they're looking at. And I'll just show you guys an example here. So I'll actually show you guys this property. So you can see here, urban forestry, TRCA, and Ravine Protection. This is specifically in Toronto. Toronto actually is governed by Toronto Region and Conservation Authority. I like to say that, put the and in there because you can actually encounter TRCA all the way in Brampton, like I think it's Caledon, all the way up to like some places in Durham, right? That was a surprise to me, but that's the fact. And then of course they have the other ones like Cloaca and Credit Valley that takes over from that point. Then to your north you got your Oak Ridge Marine and your Greenbelt stuff, like, you know, so your TRCA covers quite a big broad swatch of Ontario, not Ontario, but of the GTA, and it really looks primarily at what I like to say the watershed. Whereas Ravine Protection is really our RNFP, is Ravine and Natural Feature Protection. That actually looks at the natural heritage of assets that are within the city. So back when Toronto was undeveloped, there's lots of ravines and those kind of natural features. So that's what it is they're looking at. Ravine Natural Feature Protection. That's their main mandate. Whereas urban forestry, they are simply making sure that trees are creating the canopy that the trees created are preserved. They don't want trees being removed. So these three agencies all looked at the same thing for different reasons, and all of this had to happen in sequence. They didn't all look at it in one room and say, okay, let's all agree and shake hands on this. This happened first 2 months, then another 2 months, then another 2 months, and now you end up in a cycle of carrying the cost on a project. This is things you need to assess from the onset. So let's take a look at this particular scenario here. So I'm looking right now at a prop. This is the actual project, by the way. You know what to do for me, Mustafa? Could you pull up the sheet? There is a sheet there, the site plan. I think it's called parking considerations or something like that. Just pull the actual 2D drawings up. So I wanted to just kind of highlight this. Let me step out of the way here. I want to highlight this. So the red being what was actually there, right? So you can see the red site. That's the house that was there before. And, you know, this was when the bylaw passed and you could have done 4 units and so forth. Well, now this property actually, not bylaws, but zoning is changing so rapidly, we can now actually do up to 10 units, well, up to 30 units on this parcel. The client is not going that route. So they're doing 4 units. Now, with that said, you can see we took this site and we actually put a 4+1 on the property. So there's a 4-unit building that we're building right down here. And then you can see the garden suite that we're putting in the back here. But I want to point out this here. If you look at the back, could you open this up in 3D for me now? I want to point to the Ravine asset back there. Yeah, so you can look at the back of the property. There's actually right down here, just swivel that up a bit more. There's actually, I want to look at the ravine at the back of the property. So at the back of the property, yeah. Yeah, so that ditch that you're seeing at the back of the property, that's actually a ravine. And that's what it is. All of these things had to, so TRCA was looking at the watershed. The Ravine and Natural Feature was looking at the actual preserving that feature. They don't want you to backfill that in any way. And then the trees that were on the site, we had to actually develop the garden suite so that it's outside of the tree protection zone. So while it's not shown here, there's a lot of layered information and approvals that we had to build into this design so that it was as of right. And I'm not saying as of right is necessarily the best thing to do, but in this case, it was appropriate because dealing with these agencies, particularly these conservation type agencies, they could be very difficult to work with. So we actually designed this building. This was actually the garden suite at the rear, was when there was actually angular plane assigned to garden suites and so forth. So and this is in Toronto. So now that wouldn't be necessary to actually make that type of roof. We can probably go up even further. Okay, thank you very much there. Okay, so any questions? Anybody had any questions that were kind of coming up as we're going through these here? I'm just going to leave like for 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 3. All right, awesome. So here it is. I actually would ask this question then. All right, so the thing is, you know, which type of processes, what are some other type of agencies that can really stall your project? You know, we worked on a project where it is environmental. So that's Ministry Parks, MEPC or something like that. They're actually taking care of all of the environmental protection stuff. So essentially, if you purchase a building, and again, this is where I'm going back to verifying, making sure I verify the zoning, verify that there's actually the use of the building is what it is. So if you intend to change the use of a building, let's say from a mixed use to a residential use, keep in mind that as you go about doing that, it will require that you actually address the need for a record of site condition, right? Once you start changing the use of a building. So this was something that we encountered, and again, this is something that most people don't really think about, but it's something that can certainly come and dampen the outcomes on a project and take a lot of time. Okay, so let's move on here to the other aspect here. So screen tree. This is a big one for me. You know, I started off as an architectural designer, but I really fell in love with construction management. I worked at a few different constructors. I really like construction management. I think it's a really big part of how projects are delivered, obviously. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts, but it's very important to know exactly how a project is delivered. Now, with that said, one of the things that I always like to stress is understanding what is your building classification, what part of the building code. We live in Ontario, and if you don't know how to assess whether your building is a part 3, part 9, or 11, and this might seem a lot, but once you have done 1 or 2 buildings, you kind of get the sense. Part 3 is more on the commercial side buildings, right? Part 9 are buildings that are smaller in size, so less than 600 square meters and less than 3 stories, 3 stories or less. On the bigger scale, you got like big buildings that are part 3 buildings. They're larger than 600 square meters, and maybe I'll just add a 0 on that and say 600 square feet. That's my rough conversion. And then of course you basically are looking at buildings that are 4 or more stories, right? Those buildings are categorized as part 3 buildings. And also, one of the things that can trigger a building or push it into a part 3 is if it has like an assembly or a restaurant or something. Now, that's not going to really apply in most cases to what we're looking at here, because most of these buildings are actually multiplex buildings, right? Now, I do want to point out here that there are existing buildings as well, right? There are existing buildings that we look at, and those existing buildings, once a building is 5 years or more, then, or at least 5 years, that's how the code kind of frames it, you can use Part 11. Part 11 has far more reduced requirements when it comes to renovating a building. So for example, in a Part 9 building, newly constructed, you need to have your kitchen, living, dining room area, natural light requirement need to be 10% of that square foot or that area of that space. Whereas if you're renovating a building, that only is required to be 5%. So again, less windows, a little less onerous, and of course it costs less if you have to purchase smaller windows. Right, so this is very important, and as we're doing this, I'll explain to you guys how you kind of play and interact with this, because you can have a building, and because you're doing, I'll show you guys how you can mix and match these parts to actually make the most cost-effective design and of course project that ultimately, less of a capex, right? Or DevX. Okay, so let's move on here to this fourth, what I'm calling scenario here. So this right here is a 3D scan of the property. So sorry, Mustafa, yeah, so this was, maybe I should just take a step back here. This was actually the 3D scan of the same site with the actual ravine at the rear. So this we capture all of our projects using a 3D laser scanner, and this was actually quite helpful. Right? This was actually quite helpful because the TRCA, rather than making that project a robust approval, they actually decided to utilize our 3D scan to identify what is called a top of slope, and they didn't have to actually send someone out to site. And that was helpful because sending a geotechnical test technician out to site would have cost more to the client. This was actually able to save them a little bit here. So, and also compress the timeline. So that was very important. Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Could you switch on over to the other project in scenario 4 for me? I want to jump into the actual permit related items here. In 4. That would be Ainsley. Yeah. So Ainsley is, looking at this building, you might think to yourself that this building is actually, this is definitely a commercial building because it has commercial use below. But that actually was not the trigger to make this a commercial building. The real trigger for this building that pushed this into a Part 3 building, this was a project out in London area or Kitchener area. This property here actually was a residential mixed use, but it fell into Part 3 requirement because it exceeded the 600 square meter requirement, right? It was 3 stories, right? So it was under 3 stories or less, so it was under the Part 9 level there. However, because it was a larger building greater than 6,000 square feet or 600 square meters, it actually required us to actually do this under Part 3 requirement. So sprinkler systems and so forth, fire alarm systems and so forth had to be installed in this building. Right? This was a remodel. And let's move on to the other one, the other project in this same thing. So this here, Part 9, your Part 9 building. So you can see this here, this building was actually an interesting one. Could you swap on over to the existing for me? So if we move to the existing, you'll see that when this building was existing, so go to the existing phase, you can see, the scale of the building hasn't changed. What we did here is that we just added on top a dormer. So I wanted to point this out because, and this building was also a mixed use building. Because we added the dormer on top, does that make it a Part 9 building? No, it doesn't make it a Part 9 building, but it makes a portion of the building Part 9. So the newly constructed dormer, you can go back to the proposed phase. The newly constructed dormer at the top, right? That dormer actually had to be built under Part 9 code requirement, more restrictive, and then the lower portions could have been, it was done under Part 11, right? And this is what actually, we could have redesigned the whole building as per Part 9 and enlarging all the windows, tearing out a bunch of stuff and bringing a whole bunch of stuff up to code. And by the way, you can do that. But to your surprise, you'll realize like that would not have impacted your approval. So you have to know which part of the project that you're in. And we're stress testing these, that's why I'm calling this the construction test, stress test. We're stress testing these against, from the moment we look at the file, we're trying to assess how we approach it from you looking at these various tools that I just, these various parts and tools that I just explained to you guys here. Okay, so let's move on. Thank you very much, Mustafa. So here, as we come in, as we start to get closer here to where we ultimately are going, these stairs. So stairs becomes a huge component. If you ever developed a building, you'll know like positioning the stairs is actually one of the core aspects of driving what I call is the economics of the project. Because stairs, especially in Ontario, once you start getting into multi-unit buildings, you have to provide a second and separate exit for each unit if they're shared, right? So as you can imagine, in most cases, that's just what's happening. We're providing 2 staircases. And this is no different. But what I want to point out here is like, this is about to change. You guys may have seen in the news, there's things coming in the pipeline, but maybe not. But when you add stairs to a property, you very well eat up rentable space in the project. You have to provide, obviously, stairs all the way down to the base of the property. This is extra footings, extra foundation, more construction requirements. So there's been a lot of push to move into single staircase multiplexes. And as that start to become more of a reality, we're seeing is that Toronto have actually launched a program. So you can actually, most people don't get this as yet, but in Toronto specifically, I haven't seen this in other cities as yet, but you can actually apply for a single stair multiplex dwelling unit through what is called an alternate application, right? So you can apply for an alternate approval application, where it is you send a letter, engineer report, to the chief building official, the CBO, and they will review your project based on the merits of the safety of it, right? Can this project actually stand the test, right? And what test are you talking about? Safety. Can someone evacuate this building safely? Are they going to have enough time or warning when there is a fire? So how does that work? Your project is likely going to be required to have a sprinkler system, right? Maybe negative air pressure in the staircase. Probably it's going to have to be a fire rated staircase, so maybe it has to be done with brick, right? If it's a single staircase. And once you start putting sprinkler in a building, you start talking about like either heat detectors and heat alarm systems and so forth. So maybe these are all the things that are being proposed as alternate, and it's on a case by case. So depending on how the building is laid out, the chief building official will deliberate and decide how it is they want to treat that and whether they want to approve it or not. So that's basically taking control out of your hands. Personally, I like to keep control in my hands and in the hands of my clients. So I make sure that we try to stay away from things that will not allow us to do that. So having these are understanding that is very important. And then of course, sprinklers no different. But I want to point out here, you can see here that I have LD, limit and distance. There's a huge discussion around whether these missing middle houses, whether you're doing a multi-generational house or whether you're doing a purpose-built rental. Well, can I just simply use sprinklers in there? Well, yeah, you can use sprinklers. That's actually a compliance part inside of the Ontario Building Code. So I am not opposed to anyone doing that, but I do want to caution, like if you decide to go down that route, you have to first make sure that you have limiting distance that would actually allow you to achieve the relief that is actually being proposed when you install, or you'll get that waiver. Because let's say, for example, your property line, you're really squeezing it, you're under your 2 feet of setback, you may not get the relief that you need because it doubles the amount of unprotected opening that you're allowed to put in that wall. But if in that wall, because of the limited distance setback from the property line, if that is somehow like you're just not allowed to put any windows in there, then what are you doubling, right? So nothing, you end up losing there, right? So fire shutters is always a safe bet. Fire shutters and fire rated windows, they can be expensive, but maybe you have to weigh the cost, right? Like what actually works for you. Are you going to be more comfortable putting a sprinkler system in there that has to come with an accompanied fire alarm system, and potentially the cost of maintaining that and so forth? So these are all the things that we need to make sure that we take into account. All right. And so I'm going to wrap these up relatively quickly here because I can see our time is running short here. But I want to just point out here, CMHC. CMHC is a big part of what it is we do as well. We don't do energy modeling, but we work with energy modeling companies when we're working with clients doing multiplexes. Now, what it is you need to know here, this is not about me, it's about you. What is you need to know here is that affordability is actually the only way you can achieve 100 points, right? So it's a 100-point system. You can get up to 100 points, but you need to achieve at least 50 points to even like qualify to be opted into the program, to get your premiums sort of reduced. And I think it's even up to like 70% really. That's where it starts to get meaningful. Okay, so from an affordability standpoint, let's just say you can see just up to the top here, it says 10%, 30% MRI, right? So we're not going for a scan anytime soon. But what is we are doing here, we're looking at the what is called the minimum renter income, right? So the minimum renter income, you can see there is 30%. So let's just say you, like in the city, in whatever city you work, I'm just going to use a round number. Let's say it was $40,000, right? Let's say it was $40,000. That would be 10%, oh, sorry, 30% of 40,000, 12 divided by, yeah, so now it will be $1,000 essentially, right? So $1,000 it would be to rent this place on a monthly basis. Let's just say that was what the rent was in Toronto, or in fact, $1,000 to rent any space, it would be a real deal, right? And that's not going to support it's basically your income. So what it is we are seeing is that most people, when they're building purpose-built rental, they're really moving away, not moving away, but they're trying to minimize the amount of affordable units because it actually impacts their performance, the actual number, the investment, financial feasibility. So what is we're seeing is people are now moving a bit more into the energy efficiency. Energy efficiency used to be 100, but now you have to balance both of them out. So when we work with clients, we're seeing that they're doing 50 points, right? Basically 10% of 10 units is what, 1 unit, right? So what you're looking at there is basically adding 50 points from the affordability side, and then on the energy efficiency side, it gets a bit more nuanced. But just to keep things really short here, I'll say if you're going for 20 points, meaning you're trying to reduce the actual energy usage of the building from the reference building by 20%, you can get 20 points. Now, what does that mean in real terms, construction terms? I'm just going to ballpark this and say, let's just say your numbers for constructing a multiplex was, let's say it's $100, right? It's $100 to construct a multiplex per square foot, right? What is you're doing here with regards to the 20% reduction in energy usage is that you're basically adding about $1 to $3 per square foot of additional construction costs. So if it's $100, that's adding $1 to $3 so per construction cost, versus on the more robust side, if you were to try to achieve 50 points and you're trying to reduce the actual energy usage in your proposed buildings 40% from the reference building, that type of construction is much more robust. You're talking about more high-end systems, more insulation, more building air tightness and so forth. That type is going to probably run you maybe an additional $7 to $10 per square foot on your construction cost. That's percentage, right? So now using the $100 per square foot, that's about $7 to $10. Now you can see how that starts to bump your construction costs up. And I should add, I'm just using wrong numbers. Generally speaking, when you're talking about multiplexes, you're talking about maybe closer to around, $400, $450 per square foot, and that's probably without basement. So that's something that I wanted to just point out here with regards. We are taking these things into account as we're doing the design layout, because ultimately you can't just build something because the zoning allows it. You build something because it could be financed, right? And that's what we're trying to do, and that's how we're helping people as well. And I hopefully that's kind of getting the message across here. And this here would be a very important shift here as well. I won't go through all of this, right? So on the right, we have already passed all of these, by the way. So I'll just keep moving. So everything up to Bill 17. So Bill 108, 109, Bill 23, Bill 185, and Bill 17, and Bill 60, right? So we have passed all of that. Now what it is we do have is coming down the pipe, which is actually really important, is this Bill 98. Bill 98 is going to allow properties in Ontario, provided it gets enacted, to actually lot sizes to be reduced to 175. I mean, I'll just make this real short here and say that really means in most cases, if you're doing anything outside of Toronto, including Scarborough and so forth, you're probably going to be able to do a severance as of right without any problems. That's always advantageous. Okay? So this is something that we actually talk about. Now, I want to talk about how to plug in. How could you guys plug in here? We will actually give you guys the ability, because what we have done is develop a tool. I think we're running really tight here. We're literally out of time now. So again, with the respect of everyone's interest of time, you know, if you guys give me 5 minutes, I could very well show you what that output would look like. But we have developed tools that would allow you to actually review your property against these screens and rank your project, right? So I'll show you this real quickly. Back here again. Okay, so you guys can probably see my screen there. On that screen, so that's the screen there again. On that screen, you'll see we have developed a tool essentially as a scorecard that actually, based on all of the screens that I just went through, it actually allows you to answer some basic questions that would actually allow you to then rank whether your property is viable or not, right? So we have three type of ranking. One is kind of high risk, meaning, and you'll get a bespoke summary of your particular project based on the address, and of course based on the actual, some of the things that you actually answer based on your responses. It will actually weigh some of those things and tell you what it is it believes should be your next course of action, right? So you got the red, which is high risk. Then you have the amber, which is basically there are some things that are concerned, but you also have a lot of things that are still working for the site. And then of course you have the green, right? It's basically a high viability project. You should move forward. It will still also tell you what it believes you still need to address, but however, it's a project that you could move forward. And this is something that we can very well take a look at. What is we will do, we will actually send you guys over a copy of that so that you guys have that for your own use as well. All right. So with that said, I'm going to sort of wrap it up here now, but does anyone have any questions that they want to have based on all the information that we discussed here today? I'm open to any questions specific to your project. I believe, I don't know if Gino is still on the call. Gino, I don't know if you had that question. I think you had a question maybe about your specific project.
Hi, Ron.
Hi.
Yeah, Ron, can you check for a property which I shared with you in Trenton?
Who, sorry, you shared with me an,
Yeah, I just texted you, but I mean, yeah, I can give you the address. Do you think we can check if this tool helps to identify, you know,
Yeah, so the property outside, so we haven't developed AI tools for properties outside the GTA as yet, but that's all a work in progress. But tell me a little bit about the property. So the property, where's the property located in Brampton, you said?
No, it is in Trenton, which is
Trent.
before Belleville.
Yes, okay, got you.
It is a corner lot, 200 by 132 feet in downtown Trenton.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, obviously those areas it has a lot of they're usually in a lot of watershed area. Do you know if it's near any type of sort of natural heritage area? Is it surrounded by a lot of vegetation?
No, it is a downtown commercial lot.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, so I can certainly. Who am I speaking with? Could you give me a name? Is that okay?
Navneet.
Navneet. Okay, hey Navneet. So yeah, we can definitely take a look at that. Why don't we we can hang back and we can actually take a look at that, and I can actually prepare, like actually go through that with you, right? Specifically.
For sure. Thank you.
All right, yeah. But yeah, so when you're dealing with properties that are in those secondary, tertiary type markets, I always want to caution, obviously, the first thing I want to know is like, what are you trying to do as far as your unit count, right? It might be located in a downtown area, but is it a residential zone or is it in an urban downtown area? Because those are going to have very different requirements. One of the things that I really like about working in Toronto have all these really cool upzoning policies that they have put in place that make it ultimately as of right to do a lot of major developments, right? So you can do, up to 60, I believe, units on a major street, right? And you can do, as of right, you can do 6 units in most wards that are in wards that are in Toronto and East, and then of course Ward 23. And there's a lot of other things that they have really waived. In Hamilton also have a lot of great areas like that. However, when you start going out into these communities, these other communities, what happens is in the downtown areas is actually, I'll tell you, the biggest challenge is that because they're in these downtown areas, sometimes these downtown areas cannot handle the extra demand that these properties, multiplexes are going to build, and sometimes you have to do these additional studies. So, but we can take a look at it, absolutely. That's certainly within our wheelhouse. We can talk about that for sure. That's a good one. I mean, more specific to an address. Any other question anyone might have there? Yeah, so I'll just talk right now about some of the budget ambushes. And by the way, I don't want to hold anyone here hostage on the call. So just so you know, I'm open to taking questions here. We're kind of in we're past the time, and you guys are certainly free to go. But I'm certainly here to take any questions and answer any questions.
Hey Ron, can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
Hey, this is Raja.
Hey, Raja.
I'm just wondering about the accessibility elevator. I'm often hearing mixed comments from different people. Some people say anything more than 6 units, you need to have a accessible elevator. But some people says no, you don't have to have accessibility. I personally, one of my projects, I don't have to add accessibility elevator. City said okay, building permit. So could you comment on that?
Yeah, so you certainly don't need to have elevators in a building that's less than 6. Well, in Toronto, there's some mix up here, but anything that's over 4 stories, right, you would need to start putting elevator in. Now, with that said, here's the nuance. When you start talking about putting in lifts, and there's different type of carrying systems that you can use. There's various carrying systems. Sorry, one second here. I just want to remove something from my screen. So there's various carrying systems that can be used. You want to look at the barrier-free part. Like that's what it is they're really looking at. On a 6-unit building, you definitely don't need to have a lift. You can have that if you're trying to achieve, and this is kind of where it is, we're trying to talk holistically about the development. If you're trying to achieve more points from a CMHC standpoint, and now you're adding in you're adding in accessibility points in there, that may be a requirement. So I don't know the whole story, but just for you to answer your question, the short answer, I don't have enough information as yet, but the short answer would be no, you don't need an elevator lift for a 4-unit building. There is no barrier-free path that would have to be established for that, and it's all residential, right? Am I correct?
That's correct.
It's all residential. Now, we did work on a property that had a commercial aspect to it, and we did have to, it was just a small office space. We actually had to do that to circumvent some other requirements. So we added a small little office space that was considered commercial, and we had to make that barrier free, right? But it was only kind of isolated to one aspect. It didn't have to be barrier free part throughout the floors of the building, right? So the short answer, Raj, is no. You would not be required for that. But of course, there are specific pivots and nuances. Like as I said, if you're going for accessibility in CMHC, you probably are going to require that based on what it is you're trying to achieve and the level of I think it's Hansen thing. So hopefully that helps. Yeah. Awesome. That's a really good one. And I would also say, you know, one of the things that I see a lot of people kind of stumble on is the underground stuff, right? The underground stuff stalls people like almost every single project I work on because, Toronto, by the way, is doing amazing stuff. I don't know how many people here are doing work in Toronto, but Toronto actually have like some of the most flexible policies and they keep putting more in as well. You know, I didn't really talk about DCs or HST and anything like that, but all of these are things that we're considering, not to mention the grants available and you know, whether you're working with the Secretariat to actually get more funding depending on the scale of your project and modular. There's a whole bunch of stuff. But Toronto is very open to doing a lot of these things. So, you know, when you're looking at a project, like I really call myself like a development partner because I'm really trying to help developers understand holistically how to make this project work. And sometimes, yeah, you might say to yourself, you actually don't want to have 25% of your units like that's actually rental that has to meet the 30% medium renters income threshold for CMHC. But probably that works because now you can actually get up to, you know, funding for your planning, funding for you get reduced taxes, DCs removed by working with the city when you do something like that, because those sort of agreements span multiple agencies, right? So the Housing Secretariat might agree with your 3 units that you're adding to your 20-unit building or whatever that might be, and now they're giving you funding to do the work. So holistically, it works. Now, obviously, there's the long-term holding aspect of those properties that you have to take into account, but that's something that I try to help people just think about. Just think about it holistically, right? Don't just focus on one area because that's not really going to give you the best solution. Yeah. Okay, awesome.